On the afternoon of the 25th of February, 1957, a young college student was checking muskrat traps in a wooded area off Susquehanna Road in Philadelphia's Fox Chase neighborhood. It was a cold, overcast day. As he walked through the underbrush near an illegal dumping ground, something caught his eye: a large cardboard box lying on its side beneath some tree branches. He approached and looked inside. What he saw made him recoil in horror. Wrapped in a cheap flannel blanket was the body of a small boy, his eyes half open, staring at nothing. The child appeared to be around 4 years old, with blonde hair that had been crudely cut short. His small body was covered in bruises. He ran to a nearby house and called the police. When Philadelphia police arrived at the scene, they found a crime that would haunt the city for more than 6 decades. The boy's body was inside a JC Penney bassinet box. His hair had been recently cropped in a rough, unprofessional manner, with clumps of hair still clinging to his body and scattered in the box. He was severely malnourished, weighing only about 30 pounds. His body bore signs of brutal abuse, contusions, abrasions, and what appeared to be surgical scars on his ankle and groin. The back of his head had been smashed in. Welcome to Vanishing Threads. Today, we're exploring the case of the boy in the box, known for 65 years as America's unknown child. In 1957, a young boy's battered body was found discarded in a cardboard box in Philadelphia. Despite one of the most extensive missing persons investigations in American history, despite hundreds of thousands of flyers distributed across the city, despite decades of dedicated detective work, no one could identify him. He became a symbol of forgotten children, of cases that seemed impossible to solve. Then, in 2022, modern DNA technology and forensic genealogy finally gave him back his name, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. This is the story of how a 65-year-old mystery was finally solved, and why his murder remains unsolved still. Fox Chase in 1957 was a quiet, middle-class neighborhood in northeast Philadelphia, characterized by tree-lined streets and modest homes. Susquehanna Road, where the body was found, ran through a semi-rural area with patches of woodland. The location where the box was discovered was an illegal dumping site, littered with trash and debris. It was not a place where children played or where people regularly walked. Whoever had left the boy's body there had chosen a spot where it might not be found for some time. The initial investigation was led by Philadelphia police homicide detectives. The autopsy was conducted by the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office. The findings painted a grim picture of the child's short life. The boy was determined to be between 4 and 6 years old, approximately 3 feet 3 inches tall. He had been dead for several days, possibly up to a week, before his body was discovered. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head, resulting in a subdural hemorrhage and pleural effusions. Essentially, he had been beaten to death. The boy's body showed signs of chronic malnourishment and neglect. He had multiple old bruises in various stages of healing, suggesting ongoing abuse. There were surgical scars on his left ankle and in his groin area, indicating he had received some medical care at some point in his life. His fingernails and toenails had been recently trimmed. Most puzzling was his hair. It had been cut very recently, possibly even after death, in a crude, uneven manner. Clumps of hair found in the box and on his body suggested the haircut had been done in haste. The blanket wrapped around the boy was traced to a local department store, but it was a common item sold in large quantities. The JC Penney bassinet box was similarly common. Thousands had been sold in the Philadelphia area. Both items were dead ends. Philadelphia police launched one of the most extensive missing persons investigations in the city's history. Detectives clothed the boy's body and took photographs of his face, trying to make him look as lifelike as possible in hopes someone would recognize him. These photographs were distributed widely, though the sight of the dead child's face was deeply disturbing to those who saw them. Police Commissioner Thomas J. Gibbons approved a massive publicity campaign. Flyers with the boy's photograph and description were printed, not hundreds, not thousands, but 400,000 copies. These flyers were distributed across Philadelphia in an unprecedented manner. They were included with Philadelphia Gas Works and Philadelphia Electric Company bills. ensuring that nearly every household in the city received one. They were posted in grocery stores, drugstores, train stations, and bus terminals. They were distributed to schools, churches, and community centers. The response was overwhelming, but not in the way investigators had hoped. Hundreds of tips poured in. Parents of missing children came forward, hoping and dreading in equal measure that the boy might be theirs. Each lead was investigated. Each was ruled out. Despite the massive publicity, despite the photographs being seen by hundreds of thousands of people, no one could identify the boy. Detectives pursued every possible angle. They investigated the bassinet box, tracing it to specific JC Penney stores and attempting to identify purchasers. They canvassed the Fox Chase neighborhood, interviewing residents about suspicious activity. They checked missing persons reports from across the country. They contacted orphanages, foster homes, and social service agencies. They published articles in medical journals, hoping a doctor might recognize the surgical scars. Nothing worked. The boy's fingerprints were taken and run through every available database. There were no matches, suggesting that he had never been fingerprinted before, meaning that he likely had never been enrolled in school and certainly didn't have any official interaction with state or government officials. As weeks turned into months with no identification, the city faced a difficult decision. The boy's body could not be held indefinitely. On the 24th of July 1957, nearly 5 months after his discovery, the boy in the box was buried in a potter's field, a cemetery for the indigent and unidentified. Detectives served as pallbearers, carrying the small white coffin. A donated headstone read, "Heavenly Father, bless this unknown boy." The funeral was attended by a small group of police officers and city officials. No family claimed him, no one mourned him by name. But the case did not die with the burial. One man in particular refused to let it go, Remington Bristow, an employee of the medical examiner's office. Bristow had been present at the autopsy and had been deeply affected by the case. For the next 36 years, until his death in 1993, Bristow pursued the boy in the box case with obsessive dedication. He kept a death mask of the child in his office. He followed up on every lead, no matter how tenuous. He became convinced he could solve the case if he just worked hard enough. In 1960, Bristow consulted a psychic, an unusual step for a medical examiner's employee, but he was desperate. The psychic directed him to a house in the area, suggesting it might be connected to the case. Bristow investigated and found a foster home operated by a couple named Arthur and Catherine Nicoletti, located about 1.5 miles from where the body was found. Bristow's investigation revealed disturbing information. The foster home had a reputation for poor conditions. Neighbors reported seeing a young boy at the home who matched the description of the boy in the box. The boy had allegedly been kept in the basement, rarely seen outside. Then, suddenly, he was gone. The foster parents claimed he had been returned to his biological family, but there was no documentation of this transfer. Bristow became convinced the Nicolettis were involved. He theorized that the boy had been in their care, that he had died, possibly from abuse or neglect, and that they had disposed of his body to avoid investigation. However, despite Bristow's efforts, police could find no concrete evidence linking the Nicolettis to the boy. The foster home investigation was eventually closed due to lack of evidence. In 1998, more than 40 years after the boy's burial, advances in DNA technology offered new hope. The Vidocq Society, a Philadelphia-based organization of forensic professionals who work on cold cases, became involved in the case. The boy's body was exhumed from the potter's field, and mitochondrial DNA was extracted from one of his teeth. This DNA could potentially be used to identify him if a maternal relative could be found. The boy was reburied in Ivy Hill Cemetery in Mount Airy, a more dignified resting place. The costs of the reburial were supported by the Vidocq Society and private donors. A new headstone was placed reading "America's Unknown Child." The grave became a pilgrimage site for true crime enthusiasts and for people who simply wanted to pay respects to a forgotten child. In the years following the DNA extraction, the case saw renewed attention. In 2002, a woman known only as M or Martha came forward with a shocking story. She claimed that in 1954, her mother had purchased a boy from his biological parents who were unable to care for him. According to M, her mother had abused the boy and eventually killed him in a fit of rage. M claimed she had witnessed the abuse and the disposal of the body. M's story was detailed and disturbing. She described how the boy had been kept in the basement of their home, how he had been beaten regularly, how her mother had cut his hair shortly before or after his death. She provided specific details about the location where the body had been dumped. Some of these details matched the known facts of the case. However, investigators were troubled by M's account. She had a documented history of mental illness and had made false claims in the past. Her story changed in some details between tellings. Most significantly, she could not provide any evidence to support her claims. No documentation of the alleged purchase, no witnesses who could corroborate her story. The investigation into M's allegations ultimately went nowhere, though her story has never been definitively disproven. In later years, forensic artist Frank Bender, a founding member of the Vidocq Society, proposed a controversial new theory. Bender suggested that the boy might have been raised as a girl. He based this theory on the crude haircut. Perhaps the boy's hair had been long, and someone had cut it short after death to disguise his identity or to conform to gender norms. Bender created a reconstruction showing what the boy might have looked like with longer hair, styled as a girl might wear it. The theory was intriguing but speculative. Some investigators found it plausible. It might explain why no one had recognized the boy from the photographs if people had known him as a girl. Others dismissed it as unfounded speculation. The theory remains unproven. For decades, despite the DNA evidence, despite the continued publicity, despite the efforts of dedicated investigators and amateur sleuths, the boy in the box remained unidentified. The case became one of America's most famous unsolved mysteries, featured in countless true crime books, documentaries, and television programs. The boy's grave at Ivy Hill Cemetery was regularly visited and maintained by strangers who felt compelled to ensure he was not forgotten. Then came the breakthrough. In 2019, the Philadelphia Police Department partnered with a new initiative focused on using advanced DNA technology and forensic genealogy to solve cold cases. The same techniques that had identified the Golden State Killer and other long unidentified suspects and victims were applied to the boy in the box case. The investigation was led by forensic genealogist Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick and her organization, Identifinders International. Fitzpatrick had previously worked on other high-profile cases, including the identification of the Somerton Man in Australia. Working with Philadelphia police, Fitzpatrick's team uploaded the boy's DNA profile to genealogical databases and began the painstaking work of building family trees. The process was extraordinarily complex. The DNA profile was compared against millions of entries in genealogical databases. When matches were found, distant cousins, third cousins, fourth cousins, genealogists had to build out extensive family trees, going back generations to find common ancestors, then working forward through all the descendants to identify potential candidates. One of the genealogists working on the case was Missy Gillis, a 34-year-old working from her home in Chicago. Gillis had become fascinated with genealogy and had helped solve 17 cold cases, working as an independent contractor with Identifinders International. The boy in the box case was particularly challenging because the DNA matches were distant relatives, requiring the construction of massive family trees spanning hundreds of individuals. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A member of the boy's mother's family had taken a consumer DNA test, one of the popular ancestry kits sold by companies like Ancestry.com or 23andMe. This person had uploaded their results to a public genealogical database, never knowing they were related to one of America's most famous unidentified victims. Through meticulous genealogical research, Fitzpatrick's team traced the DNA match back through multiple generations, identifying a common ancestor. They then worked forward through all the descendants of that ancestor, building a comprehensive family tree. The work took months of painstaking research, cross-referencing birth records, death certificates, census data, and other historical documents. Eventually, the family tree led to a specific family in Philadelphia. Further investigation identified a child born to this family in January 1953 who had no death certificate, no school records, no social security number, no documentation of what had happened to him after his birth. The child's name was Joseph Augustus Zarelli. On the 8th of December 2022, more than 65 years after the boy's body was found in that cardboard box, Philadelphia police held a press conference. Captain Jason Smith of the homicide unit stood before the assembled media and announced, "America's unknown child finally has a name. He is Joseph Augustus Zarelli." The announcement was met with a mixture of relief and sadness. After more than 6 decades, the boy had his identity back, but the identification also brought new heartbreak. Joseph had been a real child, born to real parents who had lived a short, painful life before dying alone and unmourned. Further investigation by the Philadelphia Inquirer revealed Joseph's family background. His father was Augustus J. Gus Zarelli, a concrete and stone mason from a family of Italian immigrants in West Philadelphia. His mother was Mary Elizabeth Betsy Abel, who worked as an usher at a movie theater. Joseph had been born on 13th of January 1953. He had siblings, half-siblings on both his maternal and paternal sides, born before and after him. But Joseph himself had seemingly disappeared from all records shortly after birth. He had never been issued a social security number. There were no school enrollment records, no medical records beyond his birth, no photographs, no documentation of his existence. It was as if he had been erased from official record. Both of Joseph's parents were deceased by the time of his identification. Gus Zarelli had died years earlier. Betsy Abel had also passed away. They could not be questioned about what had happened to their son. Police confirmed that Joseph had living half-siblings, but declined to name them publicly, citing the ongoing investigation. The identification raised as many questions as it answered. How had Joseph ended up in that box? Who had killed him? His parents had never reported him missing. No one in his family had come forward in 1957 when his photograph was distributed across Philadelphia. How had a child simply disappeared without anyone looking for him? Captain Smith emphasized that while Joseph had been identified, the investigation into his murder remained open and active. "We have identified Joseph, but we still need to find out who killed him and why," Smith stated. "This investigation is not over." The identification of Joseph Zarelli was made possible by advances in forensic genealogy that would have been unimaginable in 1957. The same consumer DNA tests that people used to trace their ancestry and find distant relatives had provided the key to solving one of America's oldest cold cases. It was a landmark moment in forensic science, demonstrating the power of combining traditional detective work with cutting-edge genetic technology. For the genealogists who worked on the case, the identification was deeply emotional. Missy Gillis, who had spent months building family trees, said the work had been exhausting but meaningful. "Every unidentified person deserves their name back," she said. Joseph deserved to be remembered as a person, not just as a mystery. The Vidocq Society, which had championed the case for decades, expressed satisfaction that Joseph had finally been identified. William Fleischer, one of the Society's founders, had worked on the case for years. "We never gave up hope," Fleischer said. "Joseph deserved his name back, and now he has it." Following the identification, Joseph's grave at Ivy Hill Cemetery became an even more significant site. People who had visited America's unknown child for years now came to visit Joseph Augustus Zarelli by name. Flowers, toys, and notes were left at the grave. A new headstone was planned, one that would bear his actual name. The cemetery workers who had maintained Joseph's grave for years were deeply moved by the identification. Many had felt a personal connection to the unknown child, ensuring his grave was always well kept and decorated. Learning his name made their care feel even more meaningful. the case also brought attention to other unidentified victims. Across America, there are thousands of unidentified human remains, people who died without anyone knowing who they were. Joseph's identification offered hope that modern DNA technology and forensic genealogy could give names back to many of these forgotten individuals. However, the identification also highlighted the limitations of forensic genealogy. While DNA could reveal Joseph's identity, it could not tell investigators who had killed him or why. It could not explain how a child had disappeared from his family without anyone reporting him missing. It could not bring justice for the brutal abuse he had suffered. The investigation into Joseph's murder continues. Philadelphia police have not named any suspects publicly. Both of Joseph's parents are deceased, as are many people who might have known what happened to him in 1957. The passage of 65 years has made the investigation extraordinarily difficult. Some investigators believe the key to solving Joseph's murder lies in understanding why he disappeared from official records. A child born in 1953 should have had a social security number, should have been enrolled in school by 1957, should have had some documentation of his existence. The fact that Joseph had none of these things suggests he was deliberately kept hidden. One theory is that Joseph was given away or sold shortly after birth, possibly to people who could not legally adopt a child. In the 1950s, informal adoptions and child sales were more common than many people realize. Desperate parents sometimes gave children to others without legal documentation. If Joseph had been given to someone who then abused and killed him, his biological parents might never have known what happened to him. Another theory is that Joseph was kept by his biological family but hidden from authorities for some reason. Perhaps there were issues with his birth that the family wanted to conceal. Perhaps he had disabilities or health problems that led to him being kept at home, away from public view. If he died from abuse or neglect, the family might have disposed of his body to avoid investigation. The surgical scars on Joseph's body suggest he received medical care at some point. Investigators have tried to trace these surgeries, but medical records from the 1950s are often incomplete or have been destroyed. Without knowing which hospital or doctor treated Joseph, it's nearly impossible to track down these records. The crude haircut remains one of the most puzzling aspects of the case. Why would someone cut a dead child's hair? Some investigators believe it was an attempt to change his appearance, to make him less recognizable. Others think it might have been done for emotional reasons, perhaps by someone who had known Joseph and wanted to perform one final act of care, however misguided. The location where Joseph's body was found also raises questions. Fox Chase was not close to West Philadelphia, where his biological parents lived. Whoever dumped his body there had traveled several miles across the city. The illegal dumping ground was not a random choice. It was a place where trash was regularly left, where a cardboard box might not attract immediate attention. This suggests some degree of planning. The JC Penney bassinet box has never been definitively traced. While investigators know it was sold at JC Penney stores in the Philadelphia area, thousands of these boxes were sold. Without more specific information, it's impossible to determine who purchased the particular box that became Joseph's coffin. For Joseph's living relatives, his half-siblings and their descendants, the identification has been both a revelation and a source of pain. Many of them never knew Joseph existed. Learning that they had a brother or uncle who died so young and so brutally has been traumatic. Some have cooperated with investigators, hoping to help solve the case. Others have chosen to remain private, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. The case has also raised ethical questions about forensic genealogy and privacy. The identification of Joseph was made possible because a distant relative had uploaded their DNA to a public database. That person likely never imagined their genetic information would be used to solve a 65-year-old murder case. While most people support using DNA to identify victims and solve crimes, there are concerns about privacy and consent in the use of genealogical databases. Despite these concerns, the success in identifying Joseph has led to increased use of forensic genealogy in cold cases. Police departments across the country are now using these techniques to identify unidentified remains and to track down suspects in unsolved crimes. the boy in the box case has become a landmark example of how modern technology can solve cases that seemed impossible just a few years ago. The story of Joseph Augustus Zarelli is ultimately a tragedy. He was a child who lived a short, painful life, who died violently, who was discarded like trash. For 65 years, he was forgotten by his family, known only as a mystery, a case number, an unknown child. Even now, with his name restored, justice for Joseph remains elusive. The investigation continues. Philadelphia police have stated they will not give up on finding Joseph's killer, even though the passage of time makes it increasingly unlikely that anyone will be prosecuted. Most people who might have been involved in Joseph's death are likely deceased themselves, but investigators believe that solving the case, even without a prosecution, would provide closure and honor Joseph's memory. For the detectives who worked on the case in 1957, for Remington Bristow, who pursued it for 36 years, for the Vidocq Society members who championed it for decades, the identification of Joseph represents a partial victory. They did not live to see it, but their work laid the foundation for the eventual breakthrough. Their refusal to let Joseph be forgotten ensured that his case remained active, that evidence was preserved, that when the technology finally existed to identify him, it could be used. Joseph's grave at Ivy Hill Cemetery stands as a memorial not just to him, but to all unidentified victims, all forgotten children, all the cases that seem impossible to solve. The headstone that once read, "America's Unknown Child," will be replaced with one bearing his true name, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Visitors continue to come, leaving flowers and toys and notes, participating in a collective act of remembrance, ensuring that a child who was forgotten in life and in death is finally remembered. The boy in the box case reminds us that behind every cold case is a real person with a real story. Joseph's identification proves that persistence, dedication, and modern science can achieve what once seemed impossible. But it also reminds us that identification is not the same as justice. Joseph has his name back, but his killer has never been held accountable. His family never came forward to claim him. While the full truth of what happened to him may never be known, at least, he is no longer a mystery without a name. He is Joseph Augustus Zarelli, born on the 13th of January 1953, died February 1957 at the age of 4, and now, finally, he is remembered. Thank you for tuning in, and as always, stay curious, stay safe.